let's talk about Mama and Poppa. So they met in Toowoomba. Can you tell us all about that situation, how they met and come to live in Toowoomba?
Well, I will. I might have told you it last time, and never know. It could vary from what I'm saying.
Well, it'll be very entertaining then, won't it, Mum?
The reason I think Dad worked on the railway in Brisbane, 5 out of 6 boys in their family worked on the railway. Anyhow, his health wasn't so good.
Mum, before you go on, what did the 6th boy do? If 5 out of 6 boys worked in the railway, what did the 6th boy do?
The 6th boy had polio, so he worked in what was called Hooper's grocery store in those days, and Uncle Ayres always had a limp. But he got over polio relatively good. But
so that was Uncle Les that had polio. Ayres.
The others were Uncle Jack, signalman, Uncle Billy, I'm not sure what he did. Then Dad was a driver. Uncle Vince was a traffic controller, which was pretty tough, especially in the war days. And Uncle Steve was a shunter. Winnie. Okay. Listen. Where's that a prickle? So he went up to Toowoomba, and then Grandma must have boarded different people.
Because they lived just before he went to Toowoomba, they all lived at their house in...
Oh, they all lived together.
In Park Road, wasn't it?
Park Road. And Dad was the only one that married, and they all lived there till the day they died. All the other...
So the others all stayed there. So your father, who's Bernie Dempsey, our Poppa, so he was the only one that left the place, and he went to Toowoomba. So why did he go to Toowoomba?
Well, the railway, he went in the railway. I don't know why he was sent up there. He was a driver. Whether he was sent up there for what, I don't know. But, and he boarded, had private board, which turned out to be with Grandma. And
that's Mama's mum.
Mama's mum. And then he and Mama eventually went out together.
Okay, so that's how Mama and Poppa met. So maybe I might need to have some boarders in my house, and we'll find someone nice for Hannah and Tom then.
Well, I think that might be a good idea. But I tell you, wasn't rocky. I think Mama and Poppa got on very well, but Poppa was from a very strict Catholic family, and Mama's family were very Anglican, and her father was in the Masonic Lodge, which was very anti-Catholic in those days.
Yeah, wow.
It's still a little bit that way today, but not as bad.
Wow.
And
so I wonder how he went with Poppa then, like how their relationship was. Do you remember
that? I think my father was, and I think Mum's father was very good. I didn't know him; he died when Carmel was a baby. But because he gave her away in the Catholic Church, the Masonic Lodge didn't look too kindly onto him. So,
wow, isn't that amazing?
And Mama became a tremendous Catholic in her life, but she had a great dad. Was a great Catholic too. So
she changed when she got married, sort of thing. She became Catholic.
Yeah, so,
interestingly, I remember Mama saying when she was little, because of course Mama came from England when she was 9, was she? Because 1912, and she was born in 1903. And she obviously came from England, and she was Anglican, and she went to an Anglican school.
No, they went to a state school for a start, and the Catholic kids used to, Protestant ring the bell while the Catholics, or vice versa.
Go to hell or
Catholic ring the bell while the Protestants go to hell.
Yes.
And then for a while they were put at the Catholic school.
And I remember her saying she never forgave her mother. She did, after they'd all been teasing each other, and then her mother put her in the Catholic school, which she never understood the reason for that. So she did have a little bit of Catholic training before she met Poppa then, didn't she?
Yeah.
So then, of course, they met. Mama was... Because Mama lived in Toowoomba from the age of 9, didn't she?
Yes.
So she had always been there.
Yes.
And Poppa was in Brisbane. And so then what happened then? They obviously got together and they got married in 1929. I know that because it's on my...
Yes, so Mama must have been 26 and Dad must have been 29.
Okay.
And then they were there then... they were 5 years before they had Auntie Carmel. And then... Mama lost one somewhere along the line, then they had Auntie Brenda and myself, and then I had that baby sister 7 years younger than me. And then Dad's health wasn't real good, so when Carmel was about 14, he got the transfer to Mackay. He couldn't get a house in Mackay, so he was up there a year without the family.
Oh, that's massive. Why was his health not very good in Toowoomba?
Well, I think it was bronchitis, and the weather in Toowoomba wasn't good. Like it was pretty cold in Toowoomba.
So he moved for a year, and while Mama and you three were still in Toowoomba.
Yes, and then eventually he could get us a house. He lived in an old pub near where he used to work, and he actually he went downgraded in his job. He used to be a driver. Well, then what he became was a shedman, which was still driving engines, but only getting them in the sheds and so on and so forth.
Wow. So his health, they prioritised his health over his, because he probably took less pay then too.
Yeah, well, he would have sort of
something
been,
like that. So, do you remember how they felt about moving to Mackay? Because they'd never been there before, then had they?
Oh, well, they probably found it hard because Mum, Auntie Sheila, then was 12 years younger than Mum, so and we all loved Auntie Sheila, and because Grandma was still alive then, and we didn't live that far from Grandma.
So because Grandma in Toowoomba was down the road, sort of thing.
Yeah,
not far. Yeah.
I never knew Grandma Dempsey because Auntie Carmel would have. She died actually on my 3rd birthday, so.
So what about Grandfather Dempsey?
He was dead. I don't think he was ever alive for even Auntie Carmel.
Oh wow! So it's because they were still in that house in Park. What's the suburb? Park Road. What's the suburb? Wollongabba, which is where a major train station is today, isn't it? Right beside that. But so, do you know what they died of? Poppa's parents? Do you know?
I think. I think Auntie Carmel and them. They used to say Grandma. You'd have to ask Auntie Brenda that.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think they thought it might have been cancer, but in those days you didn't know. But
no,
I really, really don't know.
So but your grandmother Bull, Mama's mother, you knew how old?
Yeah, I knew her. She was 76 when she died, and I would have been. She died in 19. Oh, where did she die? In 1953, I think. So I was about 14, perhaps, when she died.
Oh, so you knew her quite well then. And what about your grandfather?
No, I didn't know. Grandma Bull was the only grandparent I knew.
Wow.
Because Grandma Dempsey had died when I was 3. Well, you don't remember that much at all.
So it would have been very hard for her, you going to Mackay then, because she only had you and she only had Mama and Auntie Sheila, didn't she?
No, but she had Uncle Harry in Ipswich, so she.
Oh, that's
and
right.
gradually, Grandma Bull did get a bit of dementia, I think, sort of a little bit, and she lived with Uncle Harry for a while, and then she'd come up and live with us. I don't know whether she lived so much with Auntie Sheila because Auntie Carmel and them. I don't think Grandma was real keen on Uncle Neville.
Yeah. Okay. So she lived in Toowoomba, but she was in Toowoomba on her own. She had no other relations in Toowoomba then.
No, and she never really liked coming to Australia. But her husband was a saddler, and in England, motor cars were starting to come in, and so there wasn't as much work for saddlers. Where in Australia, at that time, going back to 1912. There wasn't much in the line of cars. Everybody was more horses. Then he eventually became a nurse in a psychiatric hospital. I'm nearly sure that was it.
What was his name?
Victor Bull.
So he's Victor Bull, and what was her name? Was Nellie, wasn't it?
Nellie, yeah. Eva Nellie was her Christian name, I think.
So Eva was the first name, and Nellie, but she was known as Nellie, and that's why Mama got Eva. So Eva Nellie. So she would have been. It would have been distressing for her then coming to.
Yeah, because they had a lot of relations in England, and I think, they weren't the upper rich class, but I think they were relatively okay, Mum never ever got back to England, and Grandma, and then they went back on that one trip that the lodge, the Masonic Lodge, gave them the trip back to England.
How old would they have been when they went back, Mama's parents?
Well, when they got off the plane, Auntie Carmel, I think, had just started to walk, and I think they must have walked they must have come on a plane, I don't know. Auntie Carmel walked to them, I think. So she was born in 33, so Auntie Carmel said 1934, so
they only got back once?
Yes.
It's sad, isn't it?
And Mama never went back.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. And she lived in Australia till she was 97 and always called England home.
Yeah, I know. It is amazing when you think about that, isn't it? It's so. And when you think about it, Mama still liked her cups of tea, and she dressed very well. There was some things that came through. Some of the English.
Very, very neat.
Yes, and you could see some sort of English, things with Mama, couldn't you? So, okay, so then, so we had Mama in Toowoomba, and then of course Poppa moved to Mackay because of his job. He was there for the year, and then eventually do you remember that year that Poppa was away from you? Or?
Oh yeah, I can remember. Only Carmel had to do a fair bit, so she was older, and she used to do a lot of the mowing and so forth. We didn't have a car, so I suppose somehow or other we got the groceries and so forth. We always went to school by bus, so Mum didn't have to worry there. But that was sort of a fairly...
Did your grandmother help you at all? Do you remember?
Well, I imagine she did, because she would have been living down the road then. And then Dad got that old house for us. Houses were very hard to get in Mackay.
It's amazing. Actually, just before we get off your grandmother, there was a story with the old washing machine that she lost her eye, wasn't it? What
not
happened
the washing
there?
machine, a copper.
The old copper that she had to stick.
Yes, well, everybody, we even had even Mum and Dad, we had a copper. It was outside in the yard because it had a fire under it, and you filled the copper up. It was about that high, and it was a tin about that, and you had wood under it, and it boiled the water in the copper, and you put your sheets in the copper, and to swirl them round, you had the copper stick to, and somehow or other she come up and hit the stick in her eye, and she sort of lost the sight. And going back, not just for her but for everybody, washing in those days was tough, because then you had to try it. That was really hot, those sheets and that, and the copper was relatively close to the tubs, so you had to get them over to the tubs to rinse them in water. And then eventually we did have a hand wringer, which also was tough. And I think Mum must have wrung them rather than hang them on the line dripping wet. I'm not quite sure about that. But see, in those days with your blouses and all things like that, everybody starched everything. And you starched your pillows clothes. It was a lot of... And you sort of had Monday was wash day, and Tuesday sort of was ironing day, and Wednesday was sort of cooking day.
So things, and that was in your time too, was it? When we were little as well. So
yes, it's not.
You didn't have a copper then though, because you had the washing machine.
We had the washing machine, and we had the one that Anne.
Okay, Mum. What were you going to tell us about?
Well, what I was going to say then, we progressed from the copper to an electric washing machine that had the wringer on top. And I can remember Michael, because Anne wasn't a year old, and Michael was on the ground. I think he had a playmate over, and I looked round to them, and I'd put Anne in the tub, and she put her arm through the wringer washing machine, and because it was electric, and to this day, Anne should have had a skin graft. She's got a big mark on her arm.
Yes, when actually I was teaching, if you remember, Mum, I'd get you in to do the history, you and Lorna in my classes for grade 2. And they always, children today, grade 6 and 7 and 8 that I've taught, have come back to me and said, I remember that story you told us about your sister, Mrs. Mann. You know, so they really actually were, the children are interested to hear that, because they just couldn't imagine it, because they don't have washing machines like that today.
No, and we had what you called a scrubbing board.
Yes.
And you had to put the dirty shirts on the board and scrub them away to get the dirt out. Nothing like Vanish as you got today.
And when you look at that, we've just talked about 2 injuries. So that's Grandma Bull with her during the washing, and even Anne, and that's, you know, that happening to Anne, and that was. So you just wonder over the years how many injuries occurred from during the washing. So
I think people sometimes on a fire, to get the fire going, would throw in a bit of Kero, and I think people would have been well and truly burnt because things.
Did everyone need to get a fire? Most people, when they did the washing, they used a copper pot with a fire, did they?
Oh, well, unless you had an electric copper, gradually electric coppers came in, but ours was the old wood copper.
That you did outside. Did you do it like in a room outside?
Oh, no, out in the open.
So it's a bit like how we all had the, where we burnt what did we call that? When we all burnt all the rubbish out in the fire outside. Yeah. We all had because in Mackay we had that. You know, so you would have had that to burn all the rubbish. What was that? An old 44-gallon drum, wasn't it? That we would have used, something like that.
Did. But the copper, was about that high sort of thing, and it was made of, I think it was made of copper.
Yeah.
So that's how.
And what was the stick made of that you used?
Well, just wood. It was
just a wood stick. Yeah, fair
with
enough.
round at the end for thinging, and
Okay.